Members, we have got a quorum. Let's get started. Item number 1 on the agenda, confirmation of minutes. We'll be given 2 sets of minutes by the Secretariat, and they are CB2 1071, 1213, and CB2 1193, 1213. We haven't received any proposed amendments from members. So can we confirm the minutes? Okay, thank you. Next item, information papers issued since the last meeting. The Secretariat has forwarded 6 papers to us. 1, a letter from Mr. Christopher CHUNG regarding the progress of the construction works of the Victoria Park Swimming Pool Complex project. 2nd, also from Mr. Christopher CHUNG regarding the construction work of the Victoria Park and administration's response. And another one is from Ms. Claudia Mao with regard to facilities of centralized public services in districts. And Mr. James Tin raised a question about Tin Sao Bazaar in Tin Shui Wai, and there's an administration's information paper on that. And also there's a referral memorandum from the Public Complaints Office of this Council concerning a request from the Chevalier Garden Concern Group. And then we have an administration's response to Ms. Claudia Mao's letter. Ms. Mao is not here. And we have another one about support and assistance rendered to the street sleepers. This has been put on the agenda of the Welfare Services Panel, and members have been invited to attend that meeting. Date of next meeting and items for discussion. Please refer to the list. The next meeting will be held on this 14th of June at 8:30 a.m. First item is about first territory-wide survey on the intangible cultural heritage, and that is number 1 on the list. And 2nd, support and assistance for ethnic minority groups, and that is item number 2 on the list. Mr. Peter Zhou? I understand there's a review and a report on the Tin Sao Bazaar in Tin Shui Wai. We have received letters from community organizations responding to that government report. We have invested so much in the Tin Sao Bazaar, and they have now made some changes to the project. I don't know what we are going to discuss in July, and maybe we should put this on the agenda for the next meeting. Well, I haven't actually read this document. I talked to our clerk before the meeting. I said I would ask the administration to respond to the latest views expressed by these people. And after receiving a response from the administration, I will talk to the clerk and to members and then decide whether we should discuss this in the next meeting. Well, maybe if we get a response, we don't need to have a discussion. But there are other issues which have not been raised for discussion. For example, how can we really ensure that the Tin Sao Bazaar can be viable? How can we inject some vitality into the project? I think that that's something we need to look into. Members, Mr. Tony Chair, please be brief. There are some recommendations that they were made in April, and now it's already the end of May. maybe we should let them implement those recommendations, and then we should see whether there will be any improvements in the operation before we make a decision on the next move. Mr. Leung Chi-chung. After Mr. Michael Tin has forwarded his views, the administration has already provided some response. But as Mr. Peter Chung has said, we haven't touched the deep-seated issues. These are just stopgap, superficial measures. I actually tried to talk to Tonghua Group of Hospitals through the district office, and the TWGH was reluctant to respond to me as chairman of the district council. So maybe we should ask them to come and discuss with us on the ways and means to make improvements. It's generally regarded in the community that it's a failure. There's a suggestion that every one of the 18 districts to do this, but the very first one is already a failure. So I propose that we discuss this subject next time. Ms. Sitho? Well, we had a previous experience of the Dragon Fair, and so it was a failure. So is this Tin Sao Bazaar. I noticed that we are going to talk about private recreational leases in July. Some leases have just recently been renewed for another 15 years. This is an important issue. Can we have a special meeting? Perhaps at that special meeting we can have one substantial item and to get together with another less substantial topic. All right, so we all want to discuss the subject, and Ms. Sitho has raised another issue of concern, where the private clubs are now to offer premises for the marriage ceremonies. Well, let's not talk about the substantive issues. So the proposal from Ms. Ho is to have a special meeting with 2 items. Deputy Chairman, first of all, I agree that we should review the situation with Tin Sao Bazaar quickly, because the operators are paying rent. And we need to have a special meeting on private recreational leases. We need to allow more time so as to get more information from the administration. After the meeting, we can work out the time with the administration. But may I clarify a point here? For that additional or special meeting, are we going to discuss Tin Sao Bazaar as well as private recreational leases? Would that be all? So 2 issues, 2 items, private recreational leases plus Tin Sao Bazaar. Any disagreement or any additional comments? Well, if there are no further comments, I'll ask the clerk to work out the meeting time with the administration. If we have a special meeting or you want to get some deputations, yes. One more thing. There's a letter from the Deputy Chairman concerning the review of district councils. On the 20th of May, there was a discussion at the CA panel concerning the number of seats and the number of DC members. The administration is not willing to lump this question with the remuneration and allowance for district council members. So maybe we should put this issue on the list of outstanding items for discussion. Well, we need to do some tough negotiation. The 2 bureaus are very difficult to handle. The CMAB says it will only look at the number of seats, and for this panel, the HA panel, HAB would only be willing to talk about other issues. But there are other issues, how to draw the boundaries, allowances, and so on and so forth. We need to pursue the matter with the two directors of bureaus concerned. They are now passing the buck to one another. Can we be given some indication on how much longer we have to wait? We hope that before 2017, we'll be able to listen to views from the community concerning the functions and the duties of district councils. I think we can only talk to the administration. We'll reflect members' views. Let's hope they can come back in good time. But let's put this on the list first. All right. Now we move on to item 4. Provision of funding for acquisition of artworks.
We will now invite the administration to join us. For this item, we have also invited members or not a member of our panel to join our discussion. According to our standing orders, if members have any direct or indirect pecuniary interests involved, they should make a declaration of their respective interests. And also, before members speak, please declare your interest before you speak. Mr. Lam Tai Fai. No, I thought you were going to make a declaration. No. So, first of all, I'd like to invite the Secretary to walk us through the administration's paper. Thank you. Good morning, members. I'm very pleased to come with our colleagues from the LCSD to brief members about our intention to apply for funding, for the provision of funding for acquiring and commissioning artworks by local artists. We want to build Hong Kong into an international artistic metropolitan city. The funding proposal is aimed at proposing talents in visual arts to build up the profile of our local artists, and this is very important for the development of the career of our artists. We will acquire their products and display them in a museum, and that's one way to enhance the profile. Also, through the various arts programs organized by the SCSD, we've built up the public's interest in the arts, and the public can, through the enjoyment of such arts, come to know about the artists who create such works. So therefore, in our proposal, we also suggest that we should commission artworks by local artists for display. The LCSD has been acquiring create works of local artists, but the number of such artworks we can procure is subject to various constraints. We are now proposing a dedicated funding so that we can use the funds to acquire the works of local artists and also to encourage them to engage in artistic creations. In the paper, we've already outlined our strategy in respect of the commissioning of artworks by local artists, and we hope the members will support our proposal so that we will be able to go to the FC for funding as soon as possible in order that the plan could be implemented as soon as possible. Let me first find out how many members would like to speak. Mr. Lam Tai Fai, Sid Ho, Mr. Yu Si Wing, Mr. Leung Chi Chung, and Mr. Yik Chi Ming, and Mr. Chia Wai Chin, and Mr. Chen Ka-lok, and myself. So we have 9 members. Shall we say 3 minutes each? Mr. Lam Tai Fai. Thank you. Good morning, Secretary. First of all, I'd like to express my support for your application of funding to the tune of $50 million. I don't know too much about the arts, but apparently I think $50 million is not a very large amount. So you now Well, sometimes the value of works of art is very difficult to judge, and I don't know how much you can acquire with $50 million. Have you actually approached local artists about this question? And secondly, in paragraph 12 of your paper, you say that you intend to display these works of art at public open spaces and exhibition venues. I think recently there had been an incident where a child from the mainland visited a certain foreign country, and he sort of scribbled on the walls of certain monuments, and now that our local artists can display their works in public open spaces, well, this is a good thing because it will enable the public to appreciate and to know about the works. But if the works were being smeared by people, I would like to ask how the SCSD can ensure that this will not take place. And thirdly, for the arts of work, for the works of arts, there are no objective criteria regarding the merits of such works. If you're going to spend $50 million to procure such works of art, how do you make the judgment that you're not being cheated and that you are getting value for money? And because local artists at the moment still have so much not so such a good reputation as the international masters. So it's how do we judge the value of the works? For $50 million, I hope we could be able to acquire as many works of art as possible. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Lam, for your support and your concern. Overall speaking, I'd like to respond to your three questions regarding liaison with the artists. Through the museum team and the Arts Promotion Office, we have always been in close liaison with the local artists, and through different commission contracts, we have built up a very good relationship with our artists. So members can rest assured here on this. And we also are already starting a series of measures. For example, we have commissioned a local artist to display the works at the Park Deco and in public open spaces, and so we're now planning. How do you prevent vandalism? Regarding vandalism, first of all, this is part of the initiative for us to increase public education, and according to our previous record, it has been very rare. There had rarely been any occasions where the arts and work have been vandalized. Regarding procurement, we have a policy and a procedure to ensure that everything is in order. Mr. To. I think the procurement of artistic works involves a very subjective judgment, and whatever you do, it's bound to be controversial, and there might be concerns about a conflict of interest. So you must have a good system for declaration of interest. I'm sure you need to consult the ICC for a proper guideline. The best thing is to adopt a sunshine policy. For the decision of the consultants to or not to make the procurement, I think the decision should be, disclosed on your website, and then you should leave it to the public to judge. And I'm sure the consultants' reasons for against a particular procurement, the procurement of a particular product, should be made open to the public. In para 8, I don't understand the procedure here. First of all, you have a panel of advisors for the museums, and the procurement of a particular piece of work will need to have the unanimous support of the advisors, and then the number of advisors, and if it's if the value of artworks is over $50,000, at least 3 advisors will have to be engaged. Regarding the procurement procedure, of course, we have to comply with all the guidelines as stipulated by the ICAC. We certainly will comply stringently to those regulations. Regarding the question of advisors, for any artwork value over $50,000, we need to consult at least 3 advisors. Although 3 advisors is the recommended number, and we hope that the other advisors would also agree. Regarding the number of advisors, we have more than 100 at the moment, because we're talking about advisors in visual arts and other media. If you're more than 100 advisors and you require the unanimous support, how are you going to operate? Say of the 175 advisors, they are divided into different categories. For example, we have 20 advisors and experts on local arts. Regarding the number of procurements, anything over $50,000, we'll invite 3 of the advisors to give us advice regarding the proposed acquisition. For any item below $50,000, we'll consult at least 1 advisor. Well, I think you should stipulate more clearly about your procedure. Just relying on paragraph 8, we don't understand how you operate. We need to have a sunshine policy. Chairman, we can certainly do that. I'd like to add that the ICAC from time to time will conduct reviews with us. In the past, we had submitted a paper regarding the procurement policy of our museums, and that was submitted to this panel earlier. I can also supply the paper to members afterwards. Mr. Yu Si Wing, thank you. Over the last 4 years, from 2008 and 2012, you spent more than $20 million acquiring 700 pieces of works of art. I'd like to ask, for over the last 4 years, had the profile and reputation of these artists been enhanced, and had the value of these works of art being displayed been increased, and also had there been an increase in number of audience as a result? And secondly, regarding the qualification of the advisors, will the administration let the public know about the qualifications of these advisors? And for works of art worth more than $50,000, you need the support of at least 3 of the advisors. Would 3 advisors be too few, and could you increase that to 5? And you're now applying for a total amount of $50 million. You've only spent more than $20 million over 4 years. What is the rationale of you're applying for $50 million this time? Regarding details relating to procurement, I asked the director to respond. Well, our experts are well recognized as experts in the field, and the CV are publicly displayed on our website. Mr. Yiu asked as to whether or not the works of art that we have procured have got appreciated in value. We've not actually particularly paid, but I think recently the works of art that we have procured are actually appreciated in value. During the recent Basel Art exhibition, many works of art were sold at very good prices. And regarding the number of audience, the number has gone up steadily over the last 10 years. Last year, the overall number was 5.8 million people, which broke the previous record. Why is it that over the last 4 years you only spent $20 million, and this time you are applying for 50 at one go? I think for the $50 million proposal is a dedicated, amount for the procurement of local works of art. And the $50 million, it's part of a long-term plan, so that going forward, we would have this designated amount of funds for us to procure the works of local artists. Is there a time limit for the $50 million? At the time of procurement and commissioning, we will have to determine whether or not the work of art is available, and then the price of the works of art may fluctuate, and that's why we prefer not to set time limits so that we can have greater flexibility. Could the government tell us this? That is, by how much has the value of the works of art that the government has appreciated over the last 4 years appreciated? Yes. Basically, the purpose of procurement mainly is not to help enhance the value of these works of arts. Mr. Leung Chi-kung, followed by Mr. Chi-ming. Thank you. I believe the funding itself is not controversial. The question is, how do you select the works of local artists which might be controversial? Over the years, the LCSD had been adopting a system of engaging advisors. So perhaps advisors play a very important role in assessing the value of the works of art. But then sometimes this could also become a laughing stock. Take the West Kowloon, for example. You have a plastic model of the human feces in an inflated form. When you procure works of art, it may not necessarily be the case that the advisors can make the best decision. I think it's important that the public would appreciate that that you've made the right decision. Take the plastic duck, which is so popular. So the question is whether or not you will be fooled by the advisors. That is, is there a possibility that you would pay unreasonably high prices for the works of art which is not worth that much? Of course, it's difficult to objectively assess the value of works of art, but your advisors' assessment of the works of art, I think you would need to monitor that closely.
I'm speaking from my experience. We want to give sculptures to our parks, but it's very difficult. It's more difficult than getting a driving license. You may spend more than a year and still get nothing. Your advisor have to assess whether the artworks will be suitable for the park in question. Otherwise, it will never be permitted. Well, it's just a kingdom unto itself, so to speak. When you say it's a well-recognized piece of artworks, we may think so. You may think otherwise. So in my case, we invited some artists to do something, but their works are not regarded as artworks, but rather some exhibits, because we failed to pass your assessment. You are an independent mechanism, and we may not be able to convince you. Mr. Frankie Yik. Well, the first question is similar to the one raised by Mr. Yu Si Wing. This is a dedicated funding. So you need to provide something regularly for the year, for 1 year after another. As Mr. Lam Tai Fai puts it, $50 million can be a small sum or a big sum. For major work, it may not be sufficient for just one piece. So I don't know how much you can acquire in terms of pieces with the $50 million. So instead of having these artworks in exhibition galleries, maybe we should do more exhibitions and promotion for the up-and-coming artists. Maybe it would be much more effective in promoting their reputation. Another question is also raised by Ms. Yu Si Wing. He wants you to get the consent of 5 advisors instead of 3, but you're asking for unanimous decision. Maybe you can have a panel of 5, and then you go for the majority. If 3 of them agree, you can go ahead. Would you consider this proposal? Thank you, members, for your concern about art development. the proposed funding, the proposed dedicated funding is $50 million. We hope that there can be some flexibility. If this is compared to the recurrent funding, since this is a dedicated funding with no time limit, our museums will enjoy much greater flexibility because we don't know what kinds of artwork would be available in the market and the prices fluctuate. We hope when the opportunity arises, we can buy some representative artworks for Hong Kong art. And of course, the sum of $50 million is quite substantial. And sometimes we also get donations in kind, And sometimes we may not be able to pay the market price. But we believe we can make our exhibits, our collections more diversified and richer in content. As for the taking our artists to reach out, we agree we should allow local artists more opportunities to go overseas to the mainland for exchanges. It's very good for upgrading our artistic standards. As regards whether we should get the consent of 3 or 5 advisors, we can consider ways. We can consider this proposal in order to improve our acquisition system. Mr. Tony Chair, the request of $50 million, it has my support. I think we haven't done enough to support local artists in the past. If you look at the statistics, we only spent something like a few $1 million. In 2008, only $5 million or so was spent. So $50 million seems much higher if you compare this with the $5 million. Like other members, I'm concerned about the selection process. And the undersecretary or the secretary says it has no time limit for the funding. So you may be inclined to buy them expensive items, and maybe local artists will lose out in the process. Please pay more attention to the promotion of the local art. And maybe this question is not directly relevant. When you select artworks, and as Mr. Yu Si Wing has said, young artists find it difficult to showcase their works. Would there be more opportunities for their artworks to be displayed and exhibited before the artists make a final decision? Because in the process, the public would get to know them better, and maybe they should also be given some say in the process. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your suggestion. First of all, we want to support local artists, especially the up-and-coming artists. We want to give them a bigger platform to showcase their talent. Apart from Hong Kong Museum of Arts, we also have other exhibition facilities for visual art. For example, near Hong Kong Park, there's a center for visual art, and at the facility at Oil Street, we can also provide venues for budding artists to exhibit their works. As for overseas promotion, one of the duties of our ETOs would be to allow local artists to participate in the development through various platforms there. So please rest assured that we'll continue to work on all those venues. Deputy Chairman, I think we all support this application for $50 million to promote local artists and to strengthen their development. As for their achievements, or economic benefits that can be derived by them, those should not be the major consideration of our consideration. They should not be the major factors for our consideration. This is not exactly something about value for money. When the administration commissioned artists to produce artwork for the public, I think this is an important move. There has been a recent controversy concerning certain sculptures, whether it's a goose or a duck, or whether a certain horse figure is a sculpture. Maybe the policy can be made more transparent. We have a selection and procedure. Maybe we should make it more transparent, from the invitation of proposals, the vetting, and the commissioning of work by these artists. There should be a platform for public to be involved. So apart from the $50 million, maybe the administration should allow people like me to have an opportunity to be involved. So they may not be able to get public funding support, but at least they can build up their audience and followers. The deputy director may supplement. When it comes to public artworks which is accessible by the public, we mentioned a few items: art, park, deco, artwork at Art Alive at park and art at government buildings. These are public art schemes which allow artists to be involved in producing artwork for public spaces. From past experience, allowing the artwork to be exhibited doesn't mean that it's been procured by us. We also gauge public response, and after the scheme is over, we then decide whether it should be procured. I was asking for more substantial public participation. Well, I support the policy. I support the funding application. In the budget consultation, I raised a question, and the director said in the past 3 years, in terms of acquisition, procurement, the total spending was $16 million, and only half, or $8 million, was for local artworks. And some local artists were commissioned to produce artworks valued at $2.6 million, and the LCSD has only got $800,000 earmarked for further procurement. So for this funding of $50 million, would it be for foreign artwork? You talk about buying more local artworks, but if we look at what you did in the past 3 years, the reverse was true. And if you want to phase it over a long period of time in using the $50 million, then the amount you are going to spend will be similar to what you did in the past. Well, in the past, the museum, like other museums, got donations. And sometimes when we procured artworks, the price we paid was below the market value. And this time we want to have a dedicated funding for acquisition. As for the past recurrent funding for acquisitions, it would be spent on non-local artists instead. How do you make a balance? So you are not going to focus on non-local artworks in your procurement policy anymore? I'll defer to my colleague. Well, both museums of art and Hong Kong Museum would acquire a variety of artworks, but the main focus for the $50 million will be on local artwork. As for the $800,000, well, we have other museums. Museum of History, for example, which may have to acquire artifacts and so on. Well, I'm concerned about the low level of funding, $800,000. Well, I don't think we should just local Hong Kong artworks. Even if we look at the genre of South China art, we may have to go beyond Hong Kong. Well, the South China genre is more related to our history, so we would be spending our funding on that as well. We have Dr. Helena Wong, Mr. James To, Mr. Yip Kin Yun, and Ms. Ann Chang, who have just joined us to control or to manage time more properly. For those new comers, I'll give you 2 minutes each. Well, this is an important item. If you cannot provide an answer right away, please give us a written reply. Well, this paper is a failed document. We haven't conducted any study, and you want to get $50 million before you conduct a research on our art history, and then you're going to acquire collections, representative collections of different periods. What have you done on the research on Hong Kong Art District? Do you have the experts in the department?
As a result of that study, you can tell us, what are the important stages in our cultural history, what are the representative works, and towards what direction should we make the procurement. Only then can we participate in the discussion. There's nothing for us to base our discussion on, and you're asking us for $50 million. I hope in future you'll not present us with a paper like this. And secondly, your advisors. What will be their selection criteria? Will there be collectors, artists, academics, and experts in public art on your panel? And what will be their selection criteria? And what is more serious and what is more important in this paper is that you say that the arts of works acquired by the LCSD will apparently there's a division between the LCSD and M+. For the $50 million, the LCSD will use the funds to procure works by local artists, and M+ will procure, international visual art, works of visual art internationally, including those from the mainland. Have you actually discussed this? The M+ is saying that they want to build a new museum which will collect works of visual arts, local works of visual arts. They're talking about local works of art. So I'd like you to clarify whether in future the LCSD will procure local works of art and M+ will procure foreign works of art. Will the Hong Kong visual culture be also an item to be collected by M+? Time is up. You can't provide an immediate answer. You can give us a reply later on. Mr. James To. Chairman, I'd like to make 2 points. First of all, whether $50 million is a lot, I wouldn't say so. But if we use the amount to buy local works of art, the concern is as expressed in para 8 is whether or not the procurement advisors are independent, professional, and well respected. So that they would and that they should endorse a decision unanimously. to procure a product. If somebody have this suspicion that you're particularly favoring certain artists, the advisors will have to give us the impression that they are credible. Of course, they would need to have, will be someone well respected within the arts circle and supported by all. Recently, a member of this council, Mr. Chen Kam Lam, suggested that politics is not art. I'm not saying that you must procure arts with a works of arts with a political element, but I'd like to know whether or not you have you follow this criteria that politics is not art. So anything that is political satire, be it photography or painting, it will be a taboo subject, and such works will not be procured. What is the position of the Bureau? Secretary. Thank you, Mr. To. Regarding the panel of advisors, I think Mr. To and the other members can rest assured they will be well-respected figures in the respective field, including collectors, art critics, and academics. As I said in my response to Dr. Wong's question, I agree that art should be diversified and the work should be representative, and the works of art selected or the topics selected in the study, whether or not, and the themes, and the various themes should also be included. I agree with Mr. To that the panel of advisors plays a very important role. I think they will need to really have the expertise. I don't know how, under the existing mechanism, we can ensure that we get the proper candidates to be appointed as advisors. And secondly, the works which are procured, other than being displayed in our museum and other venues, an important exhibition venue would be public buildings. For example, at the CGO or even in the electrical chamber or electrical complex, we rarely see works of arts. On another occasion, I went to the CE office. I saw no works of art being displayed there. And when you have visitors from abroad to visit our government offices, they will have the impression that Hong Kong really is, is not attaching importance to art. So whether it's LegCo or the government, I think they should, ask this question. And secondly, for works by young people, I think you should provide free venue for them to display their works. Thank you. Regarding the involvement by advisors in the procurement process, we have to ensure that we satisfy the ICAC requirements. We also will pay close attention to declaration of interest to ensure that no conflict would arise, to ensure that selection is fair and impartial. And secondly, Mr. Yip is concerned about whether or not we can provide more venues in public buildings for the display of local works of art. I think we will certainly do that going forward, and LegCo also had actually procure some works of art for display, but as to how we can do better going forward, we can certainly discuss that. Ms. Ann Jiang. Compared with M+, which use funds to procure works of arts by foreign artists, and they still haven't explained clearly to us the rationale for that. But this time you are applying for $50 million to support local artists, and I support that. However, you have not given us detailed information. When you prepare such detailed information, I hope you will consider other countries and territories. You'll find that they will only procure work which have won competition, for example. And sometimes they will look at the artistic value of the works of art, the track record of the artist, and they would also assess the potential, the potential ability of the works of art to appreciate in value. Sometimes they collect works of art for display, because it could become actually a reserve of artistic assets for Hong Kong. Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Chang. Regarding competition, we are also making a similar proposal. In Para 6C, we say that we would actually consider displaying winning entries in select works of the Hong Kong Contemporary Arts Biennial Award. Ms. Chang is concerned about the procurement policy of the LCST in the museum. M+ basically is charged with the duty to build up a collection of 20 and 21st century visual arts, and they will procure them in China, Asia, and the rest of the world. The LCSD will look at Hong Kong, will bear in mind the artistic development of Hong Kong, and will select works which reflect the overall artistic history of Hong Kong, and we will also want to nurture local budding artists. For the South China style of works, we also would be making procurement of such works. Well, I think some members have just entered this chamber. I understand that many meetings are taking place concurrently, so I will now give a chance for those who've just come in to ask the questions, but however, I only give them 1 minute each. Now, how many members would like to ask questions? I'm sorry, we won't have a second round. I'll ask them to give us a global response. Mr. Chung, 1 minute. I don't think I should be only given 1 minute. What the government's decision will have a major impact on the market. You have the most resources. What you intend to procure will affect the entire cultural market. You need to spend the fund carefully. I think you should learn from the lesson of West Kowloon. For the first batch of procurement, 2 persons made all the decisions. The LCSD procurement procedure has always been very good, but you've never, M+ is not adopting that. So you really have to consider this carefully. And your positioning is not very clear. That is, the procurement of policy of M+, how does that differ from the LCST? How would you work out the difference in labor? I don't think you need to answer my question, but just tell me how do you work out the division of labor. I think if you buy something from Sotheby, you know that there is collusion because Sotheby is a speculator, and if you buy works through them, I think basically what you do will be affecting the local, the market for local artists. Well, I think I will give the Secretary about 3 minutes to give an overall response to Ms. Sitho's question, Dr. Helena Wong's question, and Mr. Christopher CHUNG's question. Ms. Wong's question regarding the procurement policy of West Kowloon and the LCSD, I've already answered that earlier. Of course, the 2 museums may collect the works by the same artist, but we have a close dialogue between us so that we can complement each other, and we also would lend our collections to each other to ensure that the collection will be displayed to our public in order to increase the ability to appreciate the arts. Our museums will basically be focused on local artists, and then we want also to showcase the history of artistic development in Hong Kong. To answer Mr. Chung's question, I already indicated that we have a close relationship with the M+. Ms. Ho asked for a sunshine policy. Like Mr. Chung said, the procurement made by the museum will have an impact on the market. So normally we will not disclose the price we pay for our procurement. But among our advisors, I think after the meeting we'll be happy to share with members the information relating to the names of all the advisors. We just ask you to simply put onto the website the opinion of the advisors regarding whether they support or not support a particular proposal to procure a piece of art. Well, I think we all know that art is inevitably controversial. I think we've talked about that. I mean, if you do anything at all, it will be controversial. I understand that when the government departments conduct assessments like that, very often they will not announce their decisions. Otherwise, if we were to adopt your proposal, then we might need to, change the fundamental policy. Well, previously all these elections were done, without public scrutiny. I think the administration already answered your question. If you're not satisfied, then you can certainly follow up on this further in the future. And all members who like to ask questions have already done that. And my understanding is that members in general are inclined to support this application for $50 million, and the administration will put this proposal for funding to the FC in June. Dr. Helena, well, I am against submitting this paper to the FC, and the response of the Secretary is not good enough. You cannot say call the M Plus Collection International. Collection of international works of art, and LCSD collection will be collection of local products. So I think we've dealt with that already, Dr. Wong. So do members agree that we support the government's funding application?
We also have international collections in our museum. You can't just go for localization all of a sudden. Well, we will certainly continue to pursue the matter with you. We're going to have more questions. Actually, I put your question to the administration, Mr. Chung. Well, they have to revise the paper. They can't just proceed on this basis. You have to tell us the positioning of the museums and vis-a-vis WKCD's M+. Well, I'll remind the administration that members have expressed some concerns. The question is, do we support submitting an application to the FC? They have to explain the differentiation between our museums. Dr. Wong, what I need to deal with is the item we are discussing. You have expressed your views. Please don't just speak there without my consent. But please ask them to clarify the positioning. We have a world-class museum of tea-ware, for example. It's a world-class museum. LCSD shouldn't just be procuring local artworks. I'm sorry, that is not true that the LCSD is only interested in acquiring local artworks. Please clarify this, Secretary. I don't think we should pit localization or local artworks against something else. The $50 million will be used to acquire local artworks. Of course, many the artworks of local artists are, of course, world-class in standard, and they will also be covered by a procurement policy. So, members, do we agree that this application be submitted to the FC? Agreed? Yes. Okay. All right. If there's no objection, I will wrap up this item and we move on to item 5. Interim report of the Review Committee on the Building Management Ordinance and other building management initiatives. Deputy Chairman, while the officials are coming in to join us, I would say that, of course, members can offer views, and the time is limited. Those with strong views should talk to the department to seek explanations and clarification. And I hope the officials can be more forthcoming and take the initiative to explain to the members its acquisition policy. Please do this outside the venue. All right, I would like to thank Mr. Chung Lam, Chairman of the Review Committee on the Building Management Ordinance. Over to the Secretary for a brief introduction of the paper. Thank you, Chairman. Building management has a lot to do with our day-to-day life, and the Building Management Ordinance provides a legal framework for owners to form owners' corporations and to manage their buildings properly, collectively, to ensure that the ordinance can meet the modern demands and to respond to concerns. The HAD has formed a building management review committee. Is the review in its first stage look at the common problems faced by building managers, and an interim report was recently published. In the second stage, the review committee would look into the more complicated problems to see whether legislative amendments are required to solve those problems. The administration has been adopting a multi-pronged approach to help owners manage their own buildings. The HAD has rolled out a number of initiatives to strengthen its support to building OCs and residents and owners. I'll ask the Chairman, Mr. Chung Lam, to introduce the findings, and if members have questions, we'll be happy to respond to questions. But there have been a different understanding, interpretation of the BMO. The HAD have a look at two areas where there are a lot of controversies. For example, the proxies, and also the convening of an OC meeting required 5%. And we'll look at the stakeholders' interests and propose the best way forward. And also the review committee has looked at certain possible amendments. And that is, there should be only a required written statement on the eligibility of an MC instead of taking an oath before the Commissioner for Oaths. And also, in excluding those shares with no voting right at owners for meeting for the calculation of the total undivided shares for the appointment of MCs, and also to stipulate in a BMO that owners should be given priority to take up the post of MC, Secretary, and Treasurers. The review committee has looked at some of these issues and charted the way forward. For example, at present, not less than 50% of all undivided shares of owners will be required for the passing of a resolution to terminate the appointment of DMC manager. Many owners have said this is difficult to achieve. The review committee has identified a number of options to resolve this. For example, lowering the 50% threshold to 30%, or in relation to the appointment of DMC members, a time limit should be imposed, or there should be open tendering for the selection of subsequent management service providers so as to enable the owners to exercise the right to terminate the DMC manager. But there are pros and cons, and the review committee will look at these issues in more in-depth levels. We have been trying to create a good culture on building management, and we have also rolled out more measures to help the owners who live in buildings without OCs. For example, perform one-stop service and advisory service to be provided to such buildings, and also to set up a liaison system to help these buildings to set up OCs and to strengthen their building management. And also there will be a panel of advisors to help to resolve building disputes, and also to provide expert advice to resolve long-standing and difficult management issues. And the CCF has also provided funding for 3 years to promote building management, including the taking out of insurance for public places in the building, and also to carry out periodic checks of fire installations and also other one-off expenditure. We would look at the interim report in detail. With regard to difficult problems of building management, the review committee would look at the implications of the recommendations before coming up with final recommendations. After receiving the final recommendations, the government would consider all the views and recommendations in the final report. In the meantime, we will adopt a multi-pronged approach to roll out various measures to help building owners to fulfill their responsibilities in managing their own buildings. We welcome input and views from members. So how many members would like to raise questions? We have Kwok Wai Keung, Ms. Sit Ho, Ms. Ann Zhang, Mr. Christopher CHUNG, Mr. Yu Si Wing, Mr. Tony Chia, Dr. Helena Wong, Deputy Chairman. We can give each member 4 minutes. Kwok Wai Keung. Thank you, Chairman. HAD has been promoting the setting up of OCs for some years. Obviously, owners are asked to shoulder their responsibility to manage their own building. But there's a common complaint that the HAD is not providing sufficient support. There is certainly room for improvement in terms of building management and legal disputes. At present, a lot of people rely on the free legal advice provided by the Bar Association, but you have to make an appointment and you have to go to the barristers' chambers to do this. OC members are themselves working people, and they may have to take leave before they can have access to such free legal advice. It's also proposed that there's no need for OC members to take an oath before a commissioner for oath. They are only required to make a written statement, because some OC members have said that this is a troublesome arrangement, because they have to go to a district office to take an oath, and the district office will only be doing this during office hours. As for the termination of the appointment of a DMC manager, it's a good idea to lower the threshold from 50% to 30%, although there may be a chaos in that 30% may require for the removal, and another 30% would require for the retention of the manager. If the 30% would like to retain the DMC manager, they should have attended the previous meeting on which this is decided. And sometimes the developer owns a lot of undivided shares, and he wants to keep the DMC manager, which is to his disadvantage. And that's why the decision is opposed to Normally, we won't have such a scenario. Or the 30% of owners for and 30% against. How much time do I have? 4 minutes. Second, about the drafting of DMC. Will the department or government give any input? Usually, it's a decision taken by the developer. Sometimes the number of shares is not divided in a fair manner. For example, the shopping facilities on the ground floor will have the same number of shares as those living upstairs, and it's difficult to get all the 200 owners to act together. I thank the member for his support of changing the threshold. I'm sorry you have exhausted the 4 minutes. Next, we have Ms. Sit Ho. I just want to refer to one particular type of dispute. I hope the HAD can offer help quickly. It's been said that the HAD helped with the creation. Yes? I think my mic is switched on by the technician. It has been said that the HAD would only help you establish an OC, but it doesn't care how the OC functions. If a bad decision to do some expensive renovation is proposed by or carried out by the manager, and then a new OC is set up to try to get, and it's trying to get old documents. Either the request is refused or the documents cannot be traced or located. And even with the help of the HAD, nothing much can be done. So in the review, I hope you can do something about the keeping of records and the handing over of records. You should stipulate it that this is the responsibility of the OC, so that when a new OC is formed, they can trace old documents.
So I'll ask my colleague to respond. Ms. Ho, I think you've asked a very good question. It is true that many OCs at the time of handover, the new and the old, there are difficulties with the handover. My personal experience is that the OCs keeps all the documents and discharges his duties, and all this is delegated to a management company. So the OC therefore will not have in the possession such papers. They might have read the papers, but they've been handed over to the property management agent. So some of them have not even seen those documents. How can they hand over such documents? For the handover of documents from OC to OC, and sometimes documents are handed over from a management company to another management company. Our review committee certainly will look further into this to see whether there could be an improvement. We will consider, for example, requiring that a certain venue should be available for the documents to be kept. Anyway, someone has to be made responsible. Since we now see that there is a problem, I think you should stipulate in the law that a new OC will be able to discharge its functions with the help of the necessary information. As to whether or not we should do so by way of legislation or through administrative means, we will certainly consider that. Chairman, the administrative means doesn't work. We have received so many complaints that the administrative measures simply don't work. Legislation. Director. Mr. Chung already said that the review committee will be looking further into this question going forward. But anyway, we would actively encourage all residents living in the building to participate in the work of the OC. Even if they're not office bearers, at least the owners should attend the meetings of the OCs so that they can better manage the buildings. They are actively participating in the affairs, but even after they're elected as officers, they simply cannot function properly. Ms. N. Jiang. Well, the problem with OCs lies mainly with old buildings, especially those in West Kowloon. This is because in the old buildings there are many landlords who would seldom appear, and the tenants cannot make the decisions. So sometimes when they want to call a meeting, they're never able to get a quorum. So according to your decision, if a PMA were to be engaged or dismissed, you need the approval of 50% of the owners. I have heard from the owners living in old buildings as to whether the 50% threshold, whether you would only the decision could be carried with if it's passed by 50% of those present. And also in many of the older buildings, they cannot form OCs because the owners don't understand about the respective responsibilities according to DMC, because DMC is a very complicated document. And also after the OC has been formed, very often there are issues relating to compensation and so on. We all know that the old buildings tend to be poorly maintained, and many owners are therefore unwilling to set up the OC. And I'm sure this is quite common. Now that there is no solution yet to resolve this problem, will the HAB consider setting up some management companies to take over the management of these old buildings, so that at least there will be somebody to help manage the buildings? Secretary. Thank you, Ms. Chang. Regarding the challenges in respect of building management for old buildings, especially the 3 new buildings, we have actually a series of measures, including providing professional advice to these owners, and also before an OC is formed, we help them build up a building management liaison ambassadors to help the owners better manage the buildings. Director? Perhaps I can further elaborate on how we assist the owners of the so-called 3 new buildings. The Building Management Professional Advice Service, I think, means that we would provide professional experts to provide a one-stop service. These management companies will first inspect the conditions of the buildings and assist these buildings to set up an OC if they don't have one yet, or if they already have an OC, but if their OC is not very active, then we will help them to operate properly. So we have assisted about 1,200 buildings in this regard, and there have been significant improvements as a result. Like the Secretary said, for the residents liaison ambassador, we are focusing mainly on the older buildings where very often the landlords don't live there, but the tenants who live there would want the buildings to be well managed. So we help them, establish a network so that the residents living there can communicate with each other and to do a good job in managing the buildings. Christopher CHUNG, followed by Yu Si-wing. Chairman, I'm more concerned about the maintenance problems in many buildings. Has the review committee thought about how it could assist the OCs to do better? For example, recently at City Garden, the project costs more than $400 million. Many contractors are vying for the contract, and there's a lot of power struggle, because of the lucrative contract to be awarded. So the atmosphere there is really very tense. Under the BMO, not many people know the BMO well. And where there are controversies, there's simply no way for us to help them protect themselves. So shouldn't the HAB and the DO set up a one-stop service? If we rely on the TCO to meet with the residents, I think one of them would not be there to answer questions claiming that they don't know. So it shouldn't provide for a one-stop help desk so that support could be given to the owners. And also when there are disputes, or even before a dispute arises, you can help them to read the tender documents and to explain to them where there might be possible, disputes. And where there are disputes, could you provide for, mediation so that small issues could be resolved and that they won't escalate into serious, confrontation or even criminal cases. Secretary, Mr. Chung talked about the contracts of major renovation works. I think the review committee has considered various options. Mr. Chung could perhaps further explain. I'm sure Mr. Chung's concern is the concern of all OCs and even buildings without OCs. Major renovation works for buildings. I don't think the government can be too involved. Whether the building has an OC or not, and whether they're managed by a PMA, they should have set procedures. In CAP 344, it is stipulated that any contract worth more than $200,000 or 20% of the total expenditure of the OC for the year, then a tender would need to be called, and the OC will endorse the selection of a contractor. Well, this will help enhance transparency. When there are major renovation works, if a substantial amount has to be incurred, then the OC should engage a consultant or authorized persons to prepare a report for the OC and the owners before they appoint the contractors. With such a system, I think it would be their responsibility. But we all know that the office bearers of the OCs are volunteers. They may not be professionals. Of course, it would be best if some of the owners are professionals. So very often, sometimes people would query the neutrality of the consultants or the contractors. Right now, to whom do they go for assistance? I believe so far they will be asking the professionals to assist. So perhaps, and of course, and it is up for the government to decide whether or not they should provide the assistance. For maintenance projects sponsored by the Housing Society, then the Housing Society will have a team monitoring the quotations and the consultants engaged by the OCs. Mr. Yu Si Wing, followed by Mr. Tony Chia. Thank you. In 2011, November, the government launched the professional service scheme and assisted the 1,203 new buildings, of which 100 has set up OCs. But only 36 buildings actually set up new OCs. So I think the result is not too satisfactory. The government will wait until March 2014 before they will have a review. So shouldn't the government start thinking about possible solution, like Ms. Ann Chen said? Since we have more than 1,000 buildings, could the government work? It would be best that they could set up their own, set up a management company. If not, can you play the role of a consultant to help these old buildings instead of OCs, because many elderly people living in these buildings don't know how to form OCs. The government should step up their assistance and also provide them with some assistance so they can make start. These buildings very often are 30 or even 50 years old. The more you delay the issue, it's very likely the buildings will collapse. Don't wait anymore. You should, start to do something. Next, regarding the standalone buildings, the standalone buildings, how do we call it in the so-called village houses, where they have difficulties in setting up OCs. Well, can the government help these, village-type developments to form their OCs? Thank you. Mr. Yu referred to the 1,200 old buildings. The property management company had helped us conduct a review. We all know that to form an OC, we have to go through different stages and procedures, and we would need all the OCs to join the, undertake the responsibility. So, and since there are difficulties for them to form the OC, we have this scheme in place to assist them. Regarding the number of OCs set up, I think that figure is quite encouraging. And because of that, we've now extended this scheme. Regarding the relatively small number of OCs which have been revived, we're talking about, those buildings where we've helped them revive OCs which were formed previously and had been disbanded. So there are two different kinds of scenario here. Regarding different types of buildings, I think they could be managed in different ways. Of course, the BMO applies to multi-story buildings. For standalone buildings, or where the titles only belong to a small number of owners or tenants, then they can form, an owners committee to manage the buildings.
Chairman, I would like the administration to provide more manpower to help these so-called 3 new buildings. Can you also conduct a review earlier? We're already doing that. Apart from the review, we are also going to roll out new measures to help these 3 new buildings. We have a number of schemes, such as Resident Liaison Ambassador, Panel of Advisor on Building Management Disputes. These schemes have served some useful purposes. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Chairman. There are many problems with building management, such as maintenance and repair, and many people can be affected by the work of building management, and there are many disputes. We have the mandatory schemes for building inspection and window inspections. These schemes have their own problems. The review committee has completed a professional consultancy. There are going to be major problems with the mandatory building inspections and window inspection schemes. We received some complaints just yesterday. Can there be some coordinated programs to provide advice? Can the HAD do this? Windows have to be inspected once every 10 years. And some owners may not know how to do it. And the management company may or may not be able to help individual owners to comply with window inspection requirements. I understand that the review committee is not in favor of setting up a tribunal on building management. These problems can be complicated at times and rather trivial at some other times. If we stick to the buildings tribunal, then the question is, for trivial disputes, should the parties always go to the buildings tribunal, because that's going to be costly? Can some alternatives be offered to resolve these disputes? Secretary, concerning the mandatory building inspection scheme and the mandatory window inspection scheme, the Buildings Department and the Development Bureau would enlist the assistance of the URA and Hong Kong Housing Society to help the owners. For example, advice and guidelines on prevention of corruption and collusion in tendering. And the relevant parties will have to sign some undertaking in upholding the integrity and the corruption-free practice. We have set up a building dispute resolution team to mediate for building disputes. We're also going to refer the relevant cases to the professional mediation bodies, and also arbitration can be attempted to resolve disputes which are amenable to such a summary approach. We hope to reduce at source the number of building disputes so that the workload of the buildings tribunal can be lessened and they can focus on more complicated cases. Mr. Yip Kin Yin, we all agreed that OCs and building management are important because they have got a lot to do with building safety, and building management has a lot to do with people's well-being. Now we have this interim report. Is it like paragraph 6? We are going to see the final major recommendations at the end of 2013. Is that the case? On disputes, the department has set up an advisory group and then you do not agree to set up a buildings affairs tribunal, and you are going to do more in relation to mediation and arbitration. How many advisors group do we have? One or more than one? There are so many different disputes. Is it easy to get advisors to help? And do members of the public know about the availability of mediation and arbitration? Are these services easily accessible? If they know about the service, only if they know about the services and the access to ECs, can OCs be ready to offer real help in resolving disputes. The disputes may be about money, interests, and even political problems. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Yip. The timetable is that we want to complete the entire review within this year. As for the suggestion of Buildings Affairs Tribunal, the review has thoroughly considered this proposal. But since building disputes are not just about money, it may be about the responsibility and property shares. So if we have an extra tribunal, it may overlap with the work of different courts and tribunals. It may become more complicated. As a result, it may not meet the original objective of saving money or saving time. So it's proposed that dispute management should be managed through alternative mechanism. As for the resolution of disputes, or the team working on disputes, I'll ask the director to supplement. We have lawyers, architects, accountants, and other professionals who are knowledgeable about building management on the panel. If we need to have such professionals to offer independent advice, we don't need to get all 20-odd of them. If we need legal advice, we invite lawyer members to look at the case and offer advice accordingly. Sometimes we need to get professions from more than one specialty, and so they will come together and look at the case and offer advice. Ms. Priscilla Leung. Thank you, Chairman. On the 27th of March, I move a motion on how we should review CAP 344. I pointed out that setting up OCs was not a panacea, because OCs can be the source of our nightmare. Some housing estates are suitable for OCs to be set up. It doesn't mean that you can discharge your responsibility after setting up the OC. Very often the disputes start to surface after the OC has been set up, because the OC may be incompetent, there may be personality clashes, there may be interpersonal conflicts. I've encountered such cases every time a meeting is convened and the two sides all agree that the 5% threshold should be reviewed. On one occasion, one side may be able to get hold of 5% of owners, and on another, the other side gets 5%. So this is a constant problem. I'm glad that you have made a breakthrough in the last term. We worked hard on this, and now you have an advisory panel. But this is not very effective as a real-life solution. Maybe one part of the parties is a big developer, or one side has access to a lot of resources. So the disputes can go nowhere but to the courts. And the tribunal is just the first step in the process. If someone is unhappy with the findings of the lands tribunal, they can proceed upwards in the system. We should consider mediation, such as the one in New South Wales. The parties will be able to resolve the disputes in relatively equal terms. And in the U.S., they have an ombudsman system. Many a time, building management disputes are human disputes. mediation is about giving advice and persuasion. It's not binding. Well, of course, sometimes it can be used to pacify the parties. I think we need to have a fair dispute resolution mechanism. The presence of such a mechanism can also reduce the number of disputes. Maybe I can get a response from Mr. Chung concerning setting up the OCs as the first step in promoting proper building management. I agree with this point. As to what can be done to promote quality building management after the setting up the OCs, well, it would require collective efforts of owners in their deliberations and collective efforts. I'll defer to Mr. Chung for other questions. Sorry, time's up. I have a question about manpower. In responding to my special FC questions, the government said some 470 liaison officers are working in the HAD, 120 of them responsible for building management, and you are now providing professional advisory service. One criticism is that the advisors cannot assist with all problems. For example, water seepage may not be properly followed up after the service is outsourced. How can we enhance the function of liaison officers? If a big housing estate has some disputes, then you need to send a senior liaison officers because complicated and legal issues may be at stake. But for standalone buildings, it's more time-consuming. So what manpower arrangements do you have for different disputes? And do you have sufficient manpower? We're going to see more and more the maintenance and repair work for buildings. Director, we adopt a multi-pronged approach to deal with different problems. The establishment of liaison officers would increase in phases, but we want to make the best use of our resources. When the expertise of liaison officers is not required, we would leverage on other professional services. For example, professional building management service, resident liaison ambassador, and the panel of advisors on building management disputes. And through the CCF, we provide some subsidy to the older buildings. We make use of all these channels. We mobilize all these resources available to deal with the host of problems that we need to tackle. When a building requires your service, usually they have more problems. So what about deployment of your resources? First, about the rank of the liaison officer when they have to deal with disputes in major housing estates. Is the rank senior enough to handle those disputes?
So would you dedicate more attention on buildings with more management problems? Certainly that will be the case, Mr. Chairman. For more complex problems, we will deploy more senior liaison officers to deal with them. For the 3 new buildings, from the provision of the most basic services, we would leverage on other management companies or even those who are not on the establishment of a civil service. We would engage community officers to assist us. I think we've exhausted the first round of questions. Oh, Dr. Helena Wong, you still have 4 minutes. Chairman, I put up my hand for a long time. I don't know why I've been overtaken by the members. Sorry, I must have missed that. First of all, I'd like to thank the Bureau for conducting this serious review on building management. Many of us working in the district have received many complaints, and many residents are feeling very helpless at a time when renovation is required and when money is involved, complex interests are involved. I hope the review can help, resolve the problem. But when I read this paper, I think you've missed out one thing. In your interim report, I hope you follow up on this, because at Whampoa Garden, I am the representative of one of the buildings, and I'm sure some of the members are familiar with the situation at Whampoa Gardens. For these large private residential developments, they are already unfair DMCs, which make it impossible for the owners to form OCs. And also, according to the DMC, if they want to set up an OC, it's almost impossible, according to my understanding of the conditions in Whampoa Gardens. Of course, your paper now here can help many of the housing developments and OCs, but why do you not also deal with the problem involving these large-scale residential developments? That is, for those large residential developments like Whampoa Garden, which cannot form their OCs, how are you going to help them? They have 88 buildings with 10,000 households living in this, and there is a single, property manager, which is the developer itself, Hutchison Whampoa. Even if the owners are dissatisfied, they cannot participate in the management of their own buildings. They have no say at all. The DMC was drafted decades ago, which are all, biased in favor of the developer. For example, if they need to set up an OC, this is what the DMC says. Among the undivided flats, they would include the car parks, the owners of the car parks, and also the shopping center and the tenants. So you have 3 categories of owners. And in order to set up an OC, in order to have a preparatory meeting to discuss the setting up of an OC, the representatives of the owners of the shopping center must be present before that meeting could be convened. So the strategy is that they will never attend. When the representatives of the owners of the shopping center does not attend the preparatory meeting, then that meeting simply cannot proceed. The owners are already taking to the street. Of course, some small owners are too busy, but those who are really concerned about the management of their own buildings, they have simply nowhere to take the grievances to. So I don't know how the government can help them in this case. For the DMCs, which are very unreasonable, how can you enable the OCs the owners to have some say? Even if they cannot form their OCs, at least it shouldn't be so lopsided and give the impression that the PMA is actually bullying the small owners. And very often we receive, lawyers, letters from lawyers representing Hutchison Whampoa. It's a very serious problem. I don't know whether you've tried to find out how many other housing developments also have a similar problem. Mr. Chung, Dr. Wong. I think what you said just now involved the DMC manager. All along the PMA at Whampoa Garden is appointed by Hutchison. The review committee is now will now be looking at the question of DMC manager in our second phase of the review. That is what should be the tenure of that property manager, and would there be a time limit to his tenure, and is there any way to terminate his service? I think we've talked to the trade. We find that it's very difficult to terminate the PMA because 50% consent is required. In future, we may lower the threshold to 30%, or that we will set a time limit to the term of the property manager. I'm sorry. You may have to go for the second round. Mr. Kwok-wai-keung? Oh, sorry. Ms. Claudia Mo, would you like to speak? Yes. Because you haven't put up your hand earlier. Well, since you've just joined us, I'll give you 3 minutes, okay? Thank you. The story of Whampoa Garden, if I remember correctly, I think I mentioned this to the Secretary and the Director. Dr. Helena Wong asked a very good question, and it's regrettable that we don't have an answer from the administration. The DMC is not only in favor of the developer, it was drafted by the developer in favor of itself. For DMCs of this nature, where everything is in favor of the developer, if you want to form an OC, you need the consent of the owners of the car parks and the shopping centers, and you always win. So you're making this unfair DMC perpetual. It doesn't mean that this is something that cannot be changed. Secretary. In a contract, it is difficult for a single party to the contract to amend that. But in our review, we've looked at the role of the DMC manager and see how we can perhaps lower the threshold of 50% to 30% for the termination of the DMC manager, and also whether we can restrict the term, limit the term of the PMA, and whether or not the appointment should be done by way of tender. All these options have been discussed. We want to make it easier to enable the owners to terminate the PMA. Well, if the DMC said, according to the DMC, I mean the owners of the car park and the shopping center never turn up, then you will never be able to convene a meeting, because the car parks and the shopping center are owned by the developer. So you'll never be able to even make a start. Mr. Chung. Well, of course, the review now that Ms. Ho has raised this issue, the review committee will also look into this. But the DMCs have been approved according to certain guidelines laid down by the Lands Department. So for the car parks of the car park, for the owners of the car parks and the shopping centers, they also have the right to participate. Ms. Mo said that if you don't participate, and as a result, the meeting cannot be convened. Well, this is rather a unique problem. It's not really, may not be a problem with one of the provisions in the DMC. Perhaps if you say that if they don't attend, then it would mean that they are forsaking the right. Okay, no follow-up. Okay, we have 2 more members for the second round, and I'll give you each 2 minutes. Mr. Kwok. Regarding the way that the DMC is drafted, if it is only approved by the Lands Department, there's a serious problem there. I hope the Home Affairs Bureau will also, be involved, because you are also responsible for the management of buildings. So the HAB therefore should also have a role to play. According to the DMC, I think even if the OC is set up, everything has to be done according to the DMC. But if there are so many loopholes in the DMC, we really have to rectify the situation. Especially the DMC manager, the terms of his office, the salaries, and so on. All issues we need to look at. I've seen a DMC where the PMA could be appointed perpetually. So if you want to, because in some scenario, if you replace the PMC, they only have to pay double the amount of management fees. And we are also working on the proposal for a licensing regime for property managers. Other than the licensing requirement, I hope the organization concerned can come up, provide for a list on the performance of these licensed property managers, like the performance fund managers, for example, so that the owners and the OCs can have a choice. Secretary, thank you, Mr. Kwok, for your suggestion. Regarding the licensing system, I'd like to thank members for your support. We certainly pursue this and promote it. Regarding the DMCs, in the course of the review, we have looked at different options. We hope that there will be ways for us to have better coordination. Priscilla Leung, I think the problem at Whampoa Garden was one of the reasons why we moved the motion the last time. Whampoa Garden is a good example. You have more than 80 blocks, and even if you form an OC, and if the management is not done by professionals, it's not possible. Right now, other than the unreasonable terms in the DMC, I understand that the South Horizon has also come to take the complaint to us. So can you help them, formulate some house rules? They have divided into 12 phases. So for on important, management issues, perhaps you can enable the OCs to do it. I think if they set up the house rules, and we should ask the management company to draft those house rules of them. And we also, and some have already agreed to do so. Some usual practices may not be contravene the terms of the DMC, but then it can help improve the building management. And also at times the meetings are being recording can be taken, and cleansing and maintenance, then they can listen, they can act according to the decisions of the owners in the different phases of the development, so that we can, reduce the number of disputes, and that there won't be any political conflict, or the owners don't have to take to the streets. So we're not considering how we can help them draft these house rules. Since in the near future we cannot change the DMCs, the government therefore has a role to play here.
Back it up.
I think that's all for members' comments. I wanted to speak in the second round. Well, you didn't see me. I have to protest that you have failed to see me again. Well, my eyesight is poor. All right, so we have Dr. Wong. Again, I'm talking about Whampoa Garden. The so-called unequal DMC is already a fact. And then whatever amendments you may move to the BMO, which one prevails? If there's a dispute, what can the owners do to protect their interest? If the BMO is not overriding, then for those buildings with unequal DMCs, such as Whampoa Garden, then it will mean that the government sits by and watch without helping people to solve the problems. The government should say something about these unfair DMCs. Some help must be given to the small property owners. Secretary, as I've said, in relation to the DMC, well, there's been a lot of discussion in the review committee, and there are options which will require further exploration. We look at the feasibility of these options so that property owners can be more effectively involved in building management. Maybe Mr. Chung can also supplement. Some DMCs contain unfair provisions. There was a legislative amendment in 1993. Some provisions are now mandatory in the DMC. And if there's a conflict, then the ordinance prevails. That would upset the unfair provisions in the DMC. In the past, the developer had the sole right to advertise on the external wall without the need to pay for the management or the maintenance. And now the law, the ordinance prevails. Of course, we can come up with recommendations concerning how we can ensure fairness of DMC provisions. As for existing provisions, unless they are of a significant nature, then we need to come up with some legal provisions to offset, to countervail the DMC. If not, it will not be legally sound to do that, but we can take another look at this. Can we be given a written documents concerning the 1993 legislative amendment? I think time's up for this item. The next item, number 6 on the agenda, AOB. Members, any AOB? If not, meeting's adjourned. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Mr. Chung. Thank you, government officials, for coming.